So, when I think about what I want to do next in my business, I always ask myself two questions. The first is, what does loving my community look like today? And the second is, what would feel good for me?
Welcome to Here's What I Learned. I'm your host, Jackie Hayes, System Strategist and Operations Support Specialist. My guest and I share the lessons we've learned about making value-based decisions, leading our teams in new ways, and rejecting traditional business advice when that advice doesn't align with the life we want to live. If you're a solopreneur or small business owner tired of the same old scale for the sake of scaling way of doing business, then you'll want to stick around and take a listen. So put in those earbuds, get your morning mile started, and enjoy the episode. Becky Bullard spent most of her career as a copywriter and communication strategist for big brands and ad agencies. A political awakening after the 2016 election inspired Becky to leave her corporate career to co-found a creative civic engagement organization. Becky went on to found Democracy in late 2021, producing content and events to demystify Texas politics and infuse joy and optimism into the work of advocating for women, queer folks, and other marginalized communities. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, Becky. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Jackie, how are you?
I am great. It's sunny out when I'm recording this. It's the beginning of April. We're finally getting spring, so I'm pretty happy about that.
Yeah, I hear that.
Becky, what does it mean to do business your way?
So, when I think about what I want to do next in my business, I always ask myself two questions. The first is, what does loving my community look like today? And the second is, what would feel good for me?
When did you start using those questions? From the very, very start, or did you stumble upon those, in the process and evolution of your business?
I think I was always asking myself that, but I wasn't maybe aware of that was the framing that I was using. But somewhere over the course of running my business the last couple of years, I sort of crystallized for me that that's how I was approaching things, and it helped me to put those exact words to it, so that whenever I felt a little confused about, what do I want to do next, or, there's a lot of things that I want to do all the time. So helping me prioritize what would have the most impact for community without totally draining me and leaving me depleted.
Well, and I imagine in the field that you work in, there can be a chance for you to get very overwhelmed and burnt out because there's so many things to touch on, so many things to cover, and so many things that you could be doing for community. How do you prioritize those things?
Yeah, I really feel into my intuition about oftentimes I have a sense of what my community needs because it's very related to what I need too. So when I'm thinking about, okay, when I first started out doing Democracy, I was really focused on how do I give people the information that they need to go about making change? And how do I make that information accessible and approachable for them so that they don't feel intimidated by it or overwhelmed by it? So in the beginning, I was very information focused, and I still do provide a lot of information, from ballot guides to kind of like explainers on how things work, like if you wanted to go to a political convention, for example. But over the last couple of years, what I have noticed myself needing more is more like emotional support to continue change making work. And I feel also that that is a big need within my community too. So I've become more focused on the emotional barriers and the psychological barriers to engaging with change making work, and how can I support those needs for my community and myself.
So, thinking even about business your way, your branding is not necessarily what we would typically think of when we think of people who work in the political realm of things. It's usually, button ups and ties and suits and, unfortunately, depending on the party, sitting in a kitchen while you're doing, a response to State of the Union addresses or something. How did you land on your branding, and how is that a way to reflect how you do business?
Yeah, I started the idea for Democracy came about when I turned 40 and I, as a birthday present to myself, gave myself a boudoir photo shoot. And so I had all these great photos. And the theme of my photo shoot was like 70s voting. Because I've always been, for the last several years since the 2016 election, I've become very invested in getting more people to get out and vote. And so I was taking these photos and I was posting them on Instagram, but with a caption that talked about some sort of social justice issue that I wanted to get people's attention for, using my cleavage. And then get them to stick around to hear the message. And women really responded to that. I think they felt a sense of liberation in seeing a woman use her own body to sell what she wanted to sell versus having her body used, by the system or whatever. Like really taking ownership of it myself. And then I had a guy comment on one of my posts, like, this makes me uncomfortable. And I was like, oh, that means there's something here. And so I just that was kind of like the first inkling of an idea of like, okay, there's something here with, you know, catching people's interest in a different way and getting them to engage on topics in a non-traditional way. And so that's kind of how I started out. And then it evolved into creating events. So like I throw parties that you would want to go to regardless of if you thought of yourself as an activist or not, but then hopefully you walk away feeling a little bit more inspired about something that you care about and having an idea of the next steps that you can take to make change on that.
I'm going to guess a lot of people would say that took a lot of courage to post those pictures, or they would have felt too vulnerable. What piece of advice would you give people, not necessarily to post boudoir pictures of themselves, but to do that thing that maybe feels a little too vulnerable, that might take a little bit more from them than they were expecting?
Yeah. One of the ways that I get support for my work is I read a lot of biographies of women who came before me who made change in times that were perhaps even more challenging than the times that we're in now. And one of those women that I have done some studying on is Lady Bird Johnson. And she has this quote that you should become so wrapped up in something that you forget to be afraid. And I think that's sort of what happened to me. Like I just have become a little obsessed with helping people understand how they can get involved in the political system. And it became for me a little bit like by any means necessary, and like I'm willing to make myself look a little bit silly or, just kind of put myself out there because if it gets me to the ultimate goal that I'm looking for, which is creating a better world that works for everybody, like I don't mind, if people have thoughts and feelings about me putting my cleavage on the internet.
One of the things I often say is that running my own business is one of my acts of activism, politics, because I'm deciding, how much I want to pay my contractors so that they're living a great life, all of these different things. Since most of my audience are not in activism work, but they are online business owners, what are ways that they can use their business to support the political landscape that they want to?
I think you totally just hit the nail on the head. When you infuse the ethos that you want to see in the world into every facet of your life, whether it's how you have a disagreement with your best friend or how you treat the folks that you hire, how you pay them. I feel like when we act as if the world is the way that we want it to be, then we are helping to create that reality. So, like in the activism space, when I throw an event, I think it's pretty typical for folks to not offer to pay the panelists that they have come share their expertise. But I did an event that was in support of the trans community, and so like I was trying to recruit more allies to show up for the trans community. And so part of the event was celebration for trans folks. Part of it was also like having some trans folks share their experiences and share insights so that cisgender folks who maybe haven't had a lot of interaction with the trans community could learn from them. But, folks who are in the trans community, like their expertise and their knowledge of their lived experience has come from pain and oppression. And so, like, I don't want to ask them to share that and not compensate them. But that's not a typical model. But I've made it key to how I run my business. And I think, whatever your ethos is, if you're infusing it, that is, I mean, capitalism, all the systems that we're in, like that's all political. So how you choose to operate within those systems helps change those systems.
Why did you decide to start your own business?
I did not see anyone doing exactly what I'm doing, and I didn't see like a place for me to fit in within like the structures that existed. And so I just decided to try my own thing and see what happens.
I really love that because so often we get stuck in a box and we're like, well, there isn't a role for this. These are the roles that are out there. Which one do I fit best in? As opposed to being like, there's a hole, there's a gap. I am perfectly suited to fill that gap. Let me see what happens.
Yeah, and I think I've brought with me a lot of the things that I learned in the more traditional roles that I was in. I spent most of my career in advertising as a brand strategist and copywriter. And all the things that I learned, about how to sell electronics or doodads or whatever, like taking complicated technical information and translating it into something that is emotionally relatable to your audience that you're trying to reach is now what I'm doing for politics, but in a way where like it's a little edgy, and so I kind of just had to make up my own space, but using a lot of the traditional things that I've learned along the way.
What would you say to somebody as a word of advice when it comes to just making their own space?
Oh man. I think I think what I wish I would have known is when you're trying to do something in a completely different way, you're going to get a lot of advice from people who are doing it the way that you're supposed to. And I think it's important to take any advice with a grain of salt and to check it against like your gut and what your gut is telling you, because just because it's not typical or just because it's not been done before doesn't mean you're not going to do something amazing your own way.
When you think about when you started your business, what were some things that you immediately kind of instituted so that you knew you were continuing to do business your own way? You talked earlier about the two frameworks that you used to move forward, but when you first started your business, like what were some things that you put into place that you're like, this, I'm doing this because this matches my values or something along those lines?
I think in previous roles, I felt really beholden to like a corporate structure and like I have to be checking this box at this time. I have to be, filling out this spreadsheet or like whatever the traditional ways of like existing in a job were. But what I have found is that if I am like working on a deadline for something, right? I'm trying to get a project done, but I have a strong impulse to like go for a walk like I said earlier, I often use inspiration from Texas women who've come before me. So one of my rituals is to go to the Texas State Cemetery and visit the graves of these women like Ann Richards, Barbara Jordan, who had done really incredible things, and just spend some time there sort of like meditating, and like maybe I'll take my tarot deck and pull a tarot card to try and see if they have any advice for me. And every time I have had that impulse sort of against my better judgment of like, oh, I should be sitting at my desk doing the work. What I have found is taking that time and space and mental break, or like opening myself up to inspiration has gotten me so much further toward my goals than like sitting at my desk and forcing myself to like pound something out on my computer that's like not actually in touch with my inspiration and my deeper like sense of what I need to be doing. So just giving myself permission to let myself take a moment has always paid off.
Yeah, and this is kind of a theme that has happened in several of these interviews is talk about, especially if they came from a corporate world, just immediately like falling into corporate habits when they start their own business, working, 8 to 4, 9 to 5, whatever it is, working through their lunches, making sure they're doing 40 hours of work a week, not leaving their desks for breaks or rest, just pushing through. And it's amazing because a lot of us started our own business so that we could live life on our own terms. And yet we're still doing the corporate way of doing things.
Yeah, it's really ingrained in us that that's how you're productive, right? You're like sitting at a desk doing the things, and that's what productivity looks like. But I think once we relax our like grip on that standard, we get so much further.
And if we're all honest and we look back at our 8-hour days that we had in corporate, like how much were we actually quote unquote productive and how much were we talking to coworkers or shopping Amazon or whatever it happened to be? Just because our brains knew it needed a break. And so
Totally.
we did something else instead of just staring at a computer screen.
100%.
What advice would you give Becky now? What advice would you give Becky at the start of your business?
There's a lot of ways that I'm glad that I let my intuition lead, but one of the things that I wish I had sort of like been a little bit more focused on is budgeting. I think I wish I had been a little bit more strategic about like, okay, yes, I have this ethos of like wanting to pay people really well, but like if I don't have the income to be able to do that, like it's not sustainable for me. So like trying to find the balance between doing things the way that I know they should be done and being honest with myself about what resources are available to me and trying to figure out, a sustainable path.
How did you find that sustainable path?
It's still trial and error. And I'll tell you, so I actually about 6 months ago, I ended up getting like a W-2 job because I wasn't bringing in enough to like fully support myself. So now I'm doing Democracy on the side. But the really interesting thing that's happened is I I also at the same time sort of had to like this sounds dramatic, but I sort of had to choose between continuing to do Democracy and staying in my marriage. And so I decided to leave my marriage so that I could continue doing Democracy. And almost immediately what happened, because I think I like was truly committing to doing this work that I care so much about, even if like for a while I'm going to have this other job too. Immediately I started having grant opportunities come my way that I hadn't had before. And it was from all the work that I had done, over the last couple of years. But also, I think energetically, I was like, I am committed to this. And even if I have to give up things and make hard decisions, I'm going to keep doing it. And I feel like the universe sort of responded like, okay, like you took the leap and now like, here's the net, And so like, I can see a path opening up to where I will be able to have it be sustainable for me going forward, which is exciting.
That is something that I wish more business owners talked about or were willing to not see as failures, because almost a year ago, I took a W-2 job. It's a part-time one, but it was literally to like fill the gap so that I could pay my bills. And I just wish that it wasn't billed as, oh, your business is failing if you have to do that. Sometimes it's just a little bit of relief that you need so that you can continue doing what is important to you.
100%. And the job that I chose, I sort of had a choice between like a very corporate job that paid like twice as much as the salary that I'm getting, or this job that I have now, which is also in the activism space. And so it's still aligned with how I want to be spending my time and with what I think is important. But it just gives that added stability and health insurance, like all that kind of good stuff. And I'm learning so much. And I'm also like able to kind of bring my democracy work a little bit into my day job work too. So I think I see it as symbiotic.
For our listeners, if they're wanting to get more politically active and are just kind of like, I don't even know where to start. There are so many issues that I find important that I want to support. And now I feel overwhelmed and now I'm not going to start. What would be maybe the first couple of steps that you would suggest to them?
Yeah, the advice that I was given when I first started getting politically active was to pick one thing so you don't get overwhelmed. I didn't do that. I sort of chose more of the process angle of like, okay, I don't understand how any of our systems work. I want to learn how the systems work so I can figure out how to make change. And then that will help me be able to tap on any issue that I care about. Then I can, figure out where to plug in for it. But I have seen other people feel less overwhelmed by choosing one issue, whether it's gun reform or abortion rights or whatever it is. I think the best thing that I did for myself was to find community. And for me, that started with just finding one other person who was interested in learning more about the political system or how to make change on issues. And she became my activism buddy. And that was really useful in staying engaged and making it more fun for me to show up to things because I had a friend. And if you don't have anyone in your life who you can think of who will be your activism buddy, like you can also just start showing up to a lot of different groups have meetups. Actually, my day job is having an Earth Day happy hour in Austin on April 22nd. So if you just start showing up to events that are happening on an issue that you care about, you're guaranteed to make sort of like instant buddies who have your same values and will make it easier to keep showing up and to learn more.
That's great advice. And as a systems person, I love the approach that you took. Becky, where can the listeners find you?
So I spend a lot of my time on Instagram at Democracy is my handle. I also occasionally post to TikTok at Democracy. But you can also find me on my website, democracy.com, and that is where you can find the events that I'm putting on, or I have a Substack newsletter that I took a break from while I was going through some personal stuff, but I'm getting ready to fire that back up, as well as a podcast that I call Democracy Voice Memos from a Pleasure Activist. And it's very short, as though I'm just sending you a message, a voice memo about whatever's on my mind.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to talk to you, Jackie.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Here's What I Learned. You can find the show notes and transcripts at jackiehayes.online/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to leave a review and follow the show. Be sure to find me on Instagram at JackieHayes_OBM and let me know what you learned from this episode. Catch you next time on Here's What I Learned.